Hey, what's up, guys? It's your boy Dick, and this is a bonus episode of the Put Me Over podcast, the Dark Side of the Ring series, aka the Dick Side of the Ring, as Drew wants to call it. This one's going to be a little bit different. I'm going to go out of order. I'm still working on the Nick Gage documentary. Hopefully, I'll get that out this weekend. But I just got done watching the Collision in Korea. Just another excellent episode by Vice. If you are not familiar with this event, I would strongly recommend you go check it out. Check out the documentary. The Collision in Korea event is not on the WWE Network or on the Peacock Network. And I don't believe it's on New Japan World. For those that do have New Japan World, can you verify to see if that is the case? I don't believe it is, but I don't have New Japan World at the moment, so I can't really confirm that. But for those that do, please let me know if that is the case. So to start off the documentary, Eric Bischoff mentions that he was asked by Antonio Inoki to uh, to come to North Korea to set up an event. Inoki at the time was in public office, and he was in the middle of a re-election campaign. And one of his campaign promises was to broker a deal between North Korea and Japan. There's a lot of history between the two. I'll get into that in a bit regarding the context between those two countries. And I just want to say, like right off the bat, one of the best introductions ever was by Too Cold Scorpio. He really made this documentary entertaining as hell. Byron, when you get a chance, bro, watch it. Watch it. Your boy Too Cold delivered. Uh, he comes in there, he's got the charisma, he's got the charm. He sets the pace. He tells the stories. I just thought that that was one of the greatest intros ever. So props to Too Cold for that. But yeah, so basically, going back to Inoki and Bischoff and how they came up with this idea, it was really interesting because at the time, Inoki wanted Hogan. Hogan was obviously the biggest wrestling star of all time, and especially in the 90s, he was the biggest one in the United States. So he wanted to bring Hulk Hogan, some of the WCW guys and New Japan guys himself, and Muhammad Ali over to North Korea. Hogan, of course, declined, and Bischoff said it in one word or in one phrase: "Can't make that one, brother." Classic Hogan line. So they went with Ric Flair as the plan B. Uh, by the way, Ric Flair was absent throughout this documentary. I'm not sure if it's because he signed to WWE and they wouldn't allow him to do it, or if they did go to him and Flair refused. But not having Ric Flair in the documentary did hurt a little bit because we didn't get a chance to really hear his side of events. It would have been really nice to see because, Ric Flair was obviously a big name, one of the biggest names of all time. So it would have been nice to get his perspective on what happened in North Korea. Um, so as they were going to the airport, they fly out of. Oh, before I mention this, Bischoff mentioned that he never told the federal government or his bosses that they were going to go to Pyongyang. So you could just imagine that things were already on a bad foot because the way the events were explained throughout the documentary, it could have been catastrophic, not only for the WCW guys, but also for the New Japan guys, and also for the respective the governments that were that were part of as well. So yeah, that could have been disastrous. So that just tells you just how hush hush they kind of were on the situation. So the guys fly out to Tokyo, and they were mobbed by the press. The press was just having a field day with everyone, especially with Muhammad Ali. Once Muhammad Ali came out from the plane, the reporters and the media just swarmed him just like bees attached to honey. And Ali, ever the showman, he decided to do some magic tricks in front of everyone, and everyone just popped. Uh, even the wrestlers, they were still in shock that someone like a Muhammad Ali was actually there, and they were all together in the same room. So it was definitely a feeling of surreal. It was a surreal feeling that everyone had. And boy, how quickly did that change? Because once everyone was ready, once everyone met up in Tokyo, they were waiting for a flight by the North Korean government to go to Pyongyang. And that's for some of the wrestlers, was the first instance of culture shock when they flew over the Korean Peninsula, mainly from south to north. They see how drastic of a change it was. I believe it might have been Scott Norton that said that as they were flying from the south, they see how agrarian and how industrialized South Korea was, urbanized. And as soon as they get to the border, they see the North kind of like in a permanent state of war zone, which they are actually. The Korean War did end in 1953, but technically they're still at war with each other. They signed an armistice. There's the war technically is not over. So in the minds of the North Koreans, they're still in a state of war. And if you go by the DMZ, it is the most militarized border in the world for a reason. And in the minds of many North Koreans, they're still in war. They still have that war mindset. So as someone from the West going into North Korea, that was a culture shock to them. That was like, oh, like things are getting really serious. So and also a bunch of other people did go as well, as I mentioned, WCW wrestlers, New Japan wrestlers, even Mike Chamoy. He was at the time a correspondent for CNN. He did cover the event, and the best way he explained it was the most bizarre journalistic experience of his life. Basically, it was a collision of alien civilizations with the North Korean government and the world of professional wrestling. So that just goes to tell you, like, this whole experience was just bizarre to everyone. Uh, Bischoff, Bischoff tells a story of where he first arrives to Pyongyang and he was told by his driver, and I forgot the Korean term for the driver, uh, but basically that person told Bischoff that he was the seventh American who wasn't shot or captured. And I could totally understand Bischoff thinking, "Oh, this has gotten too real." When someone tells you that, and you're a foreigner, let alone a foreigner that is not liked because the government has essentially brainwashed its people into hating Americans, which I'm going to get to more in a second because there's a lot more into this as far as especially from Bischoff's perspective. Sonny Ono makes an appearance. Great seeing him. Really haven't seen him since really the mid '90s, not since the WCW days. Um, he tells a story of basically because he was there as well, and at the time he was managing a bunch of the Japanese wrestlers. Basically, he was the liaison between WCW and New Japan, and he was told by the North Korean officials to not rape their women. Now, there is some context behind this as well because during the war, the Japanese government had done some very heinous things to the Korean people, and they did set up these. I believe they're called comfort brides. Let me hold on. Sorry about that. I had to sneeze real quick. My allergies are kicking in. It's actually comfort women, and the Japanese government would set up these women throughout Korea, in which the Japanese army basically raped them. Uh, so that's where a lot of the context comes in, especially and in particular, Japan did own Korea from 1910 until the end of World War II. So a lot of atrocities incurred by the Japanese government left a lot of resentment in the minds of many Koreans, especially in the North, and they use that as a propaganda machine that has been really running the country since 1945. And it was basically in full effect. If you're not familiar with the Korean government and you've been living under a rock, um, this goes to show you just how much of a propaganda machine the North Korean government was. Basically, they wanted to show the world that this was a place of utopia, even though it was far from it. And uh, man, it's really a culture shock. Uh, so going back to Bischoff, uh, another incident that he mentioned was that he was going out for a jog one night, and he wanted to go running. So he runs through the streets of Pyongyang, and it was completely empty, completely barren, no one around until the morning, until the sun rises, and then he sees the Pyongyang residents coming out, and they looked in horror as they saw a white man, oh, an American running around, jogging around, and they were terrified. And Bischoff when Bischoff saw that, and he felt very uncomfortable, and that's when it really hit him that this was serious. So uh, again, that's just the extent of the North Korean propaganda machine and what they can do to its citizens and what they can do to the outside world. Uh, of course, the wrestlers did have to make a visit to the shrine of Kim Il Sung, who did die, who passed away, I believe, a month before they arrived, because I know he passed away in 1994, and Kim Jong, I'm sorry, Kim Jong Il took over and became the supreme leader of Korea. So the WCW guys and New Japan guys, they went to go visit the shrine. And once again, the North Korean government turns it around as this propaganda, saying that they were there to pay tribute to the dear leader. And they even have footage of Ric Flair being interviewed by the North Korean press saying it was an honor to be there. And in the minds of the North Korean government, they interpret it as Ric Flair was honored to pay tribute to the dear leader. Now, um, one of the few more interesting stories about this documentary was Scott Norton and how he mentioned Scott Norton. By the way, I thought did an excellent job because he was basically working for both companies, more so New Japan at the time, but he did eventually find his way over to WCW, and he was telling a story of, and he could tell he was visibly frustrated and by how they were treated by the government. He makes a call to his wife, and this has probably been pretty well known before the documentary, where he was talking to his wife at the time. Him and his wife did have an argument. His wife claims that he was out partying in Pyongyang. Norton reassures her, saying that he was not, and he kind of lashed out on her and inadvertently criticized the government. And in doing so, found out that his phone call immediately dropped. An official comes into his room, tells him, "You're going with us." So they take him down to the basement where he was being interrogated by a high-ranking North Korean official, who basically told him that you have one chance, and you either clean up, you say you're sorry, or you're going to be dealt with. And for Scott Norton, he also realized that shit just got very real. So uh, that was one, and then another one I forgot to mention was just the constant surveillance is it's a recurring theme throughout this episode, and really essentially how the North Korean government operates. So the guys were trying to play pool because there's really nothing to do in Pyongyang. So they couldn't really drink and party, so they're trying to play pool. And Norton was telling the story of how it took nearly 2 hours to get clearance from the government just to play pool. You talk about total control and how the North Korean government operates. That's essential. That's ridiculous. That's crazy. 2 hours just to play a pool game. Um, One interesting story. This one I did not know, and it involved Two Cold Scorpio and Hawk. And apparently things got so heated between the two, and you could tell like from and how the guys who were involved in the documentary, they could tell they were visibly frustrated being there. They didn't feel like they didn't want to be there. There was a lot of tension between the officials and the wrestlers, and also the wrestlers themselves, and it spilled over to Hawk and Scorpio. And they were telling a story where Hawk was riding with Ric Flair, but decided to not ride with him. And someone had asked who wants to ride with Flair. Scorpio said, "Man, fuck that pussy." So there was heat between Scorpio and Flair from years ago. And Hawk in response said, "What did you say? Like Hawk was not happy with what he said, and they both decided to get into it. And it got pretty violent. Scorpio claims that he was pretty close to ripping Hawk's eyeball out and injuring him. And if from Scorpio's perspective, it looked like that Scorpio just beat the shit out of Hawk. Scott Norton comes in and says that, well, that's not really what happened. Hawk was heavily medicated. He was on some prescription that made him weak. So depending on who you believe, that was the narrative. But yeah, you could tell like just there's a lot of tension between the two, and it was a recurring theme throughout the trip where it was only a matter of time that before that it was going to explode. So later we get onto the documentary, and Scorpio wanted to make amends to Hawk, and they were actually at a shrine dedicated to a Korean leader from, I believe, from from back in the day. And Scorpio tried to make amends with Hawk. Hawk didn't want anything to do with it, and they kind of have another fight then and there. Fast forward to later on in the evening, later on in the trip, probably the last night of the trip. Scorpio was like, you know what, I'm gonna get you some. So Scorpio drops some chopsticks, and he was about ready to make a shank. Basically, he was gonna stab Hawk. He was like, you know what, we're gonna take care of this right now. One of us is leaving Korea alive. And just as they were about to do that, uh, luckily that didn't happen. Otherwise, that would have been an even more disastrous situation. Could you imagine had Scorpio done that and stabbed Hawk to death in North Korea? What type of PR nightmare WCW, New Japan would have had? How would they have explained that? How would they explain that to their respective governments? And how would the Japanese government and the American government responded? That could have been, could you imagine like if World War III started over that? I mean, I'm kind of exaggerating, but my point is that this trip could have been really bad, really bad. But luckily, in hindsight, looking back at it from 25 plus years ago, that wasn't the case. And we're not even to the event itself. This is all before the event. So they finally get to the event, and the wrestlers were just in shock at the pageantry that was displayed by the government. Uh, they were just, it was a complete propaganda machine once again by the government, showing the glory of the North Korean nation. Long hours of pageantry, and there were over 100 and, well, really for both nights, the combined crowd was 355,000 people. That door of WrestleMania. The secret to that sellout? Threaten the citizens. That's why it was a sellout crowd, because the government forced them to go to the event, otherwise they would be executed. So that's what happened. And some of you are wondering, well, why was Inoki spearheaded it? Why did he want to go? As I mentioned, he did it for political reasons because he was running for office. But there was a connection between him and the North Korean people that involved his basically the person who trained him, Ricky Dozan, Japanese Japanese pro wrestling legend. He was actually North Korean, not Japanese. He was born in North Korea, but then came to Japan and became a Japanese citizen. So that's where the connection comes from. Inoki tells a story about how he looked up to Ricky Dozan. He was basically his mentor. Explained how Ricky Dozan was murdered by the mafia. And just a little brief synopsis of him. If you never checked out Ricky Dozan, never heard of him, go check him out. He's a very interesting person. So as the event was happening, going back to the event, 355,000 people for both nights. yet no one popped. No one reacted because they never saw professional wrestling ever. They were just basically they were basically sitting down. Their hands were basically, they were sitting on their hands, no emotion whatsoever because they never seen this before. It was a culture shock to them watching grown men wrestling around, parading in the ring. They didn't know how to react to it. So that was going to be a natural reaction. Yeah, it was nice having that many people in the building, but it was dead silence, and those guys worked their asses off up until the main event of night two, really the main event of the whole card, which was Antonio Inoki versus Ric Flair. And that's when the crowd actually was cheering for Inoki, and that's where you see the connection between Inoki and North Korea. So Inoki came in as the babyface, getting a huge reaction of 150, 160 plus thousand people cheering for him. So he beats Ric Flair in the main event, and yeah, basically it's and as I mentioned, the Hawk and Scorpio story was pretty crazy. That could have been disastrous. So just overall, like I mentioned, great episode by Vice. When it comes to North Korea, Vice has done a tremendous job. I know I'm kind of going off the wrestling topic, but they've done a tremendous job with the Vice documentaries for North Korea. Um, Check out the other Vice documentaries regarding North Korea. Uh, Collision in Korea is such a great is a good another good episode by Vice. Check it out as well. I definitely recommend it. The only thing I'll say is that I wish they had Ric Flair on. That way we could have got his perspective because he was very important in orchestrating this event happening as well. So I thought that was a real shame that they did not. And Jericho's line at the end I thought was very interesting. That North Korea and professional wrestling were similar in that they both blurred the lines of reality and fiction. And that's essentially how the North Korean government operates. They blur the lines between reality and fiction. They've been wanting to show the world that this is what their government is, but yet you hear all these stories that indicate otherwise. And I just thought that was such a fitting line. But basically, that's it for me, guys. That's all I got. I'm gonna try to work on the Nick Gage documentary. Hopefully, I get that out this weekend. Oh, and real quick, I just want to mention something real quick. I didn't get a chance to mention it on the podcast, and um, I may not be able to get a chance to mention it until maybe next week or so. But this week marks the 1 year anniversary of the deaths of Shad Gaspard and Hana Kimura, two wrestlers that died at such a young age for different reasons. Shad sacrificed himself to save his son. That is just the ultimate act of fatherhood. I don't know. I can't describe that any more than that. And Hana Kimura, she died at such a young age because of cyberbullying. And maybe I might try to do something. We might try to do something regarding those two uh, this week. Tomorrow is the 23rd here in the U.S. That's going to mark exactly 1 year. Actually, technically, today would be the 1 year anniversary since the 23rd is today in Japan, would mark the 1 year anniversary of Hana's death. So I just wanted to mention that real quick. And like I said, I'll try to get the Nick Gage documentary up this weekend, but I wanted to get this up as well. Until then, I'll see you guys later. Take care. Talk to you guys later. Peace.